David Stern and I go back to the merger of the two leagues in 1976. A long time ago, David.
I know we look so young that it's hard for people to imagine that that was 42 years ago? That's frightening. Okay.
But for all of you who have followed basketball and can see its success worldwide today, I kind of want to review with David a little bit about the history and how we got there, because it wasn't always fantastic. And we all can recall in 1980, the NBA Finals were shown tape delay, if you could believe that. But prior to that, we had to meet and really deal with some issues that were confronting professional basketball. And at that time, 75%, or the perception was that 75% of our players were using drugs. We had TV ratings that were declining. We had attendance that was declining. And David offered up this thing called a salary cap. Needless to say, as a union, Larry Fleischer and I thought that that was not a good idea. And
I offered it up and they sued me just for offering it.
And quite frankly, got a lot of criticism. But David, I would like to have you explain why you felt the salary cap was appropriate at the time, and a little bit about how you convinced us to do so.
Well, I would say that the salary cap was appropriate at the time, and it sort of became a standard for many sports because in some ways it helped us with the relationship between and among our teams, because you always have the guys, the dreaded teams on the coasts. The Knicks and the Lakers were the people that worried about it, which had an outsized amount of money compared to the other teams. And the idea was to persuade. There were two things we had to persuade. You had to persuade the players, but it was actually persuading the owners, because for the owners to accept the salary cap, the teams that had more assets had to agree that they wouldn't be able to deploy those assets to make their teams as strong as possible. But so we had to preach to the teams and to the players the notion that it was good to have a competitive league, because if you didn't, you couldn't survive, and you didn't want the Indiana Pacers at the time with a payroll of of $1 million or thereabouts coming into your building with a roster that was not competitive. And so that was the goal then. Versus the players, the one thing that we could always know is that left uncapped, the owners would overspend whatever assets they had in their desire to win. So we were sort of doing social manipulation in a way to make the league more competitive, and we had to persuade the players that it would be good for them, that even though it might result in certain lower contracts, as a league we would be raised up and their salaries would increase.
Well, I think the thing that convinced us was the guaranteed floor, the fact that there was a guaranteed floor.
Right. We said we can't ask you to have a cap unless we require our teams to spend to a minimum, so that the owners couldn't, it sounds, remember what's going on, the accusations being made in baseball that teams are taking their money and not spending it on talent, and therefore they're building for the future. But the reality was, what we had to do was to persuade the players that we were going to spend it, and I don't remember the specifics now, but we 80%. And so it required teams to spend it. And when I said, well, suppose we don't spend it. We said, well, we're going to spend it for you if you don't spend it. We're going to give every player on your roster a bonus at the end of the season. We didn't tell the players that, but we told the owners that. And so our owners spent it for the most part, I'm sure.
I think it actually went up to 90, but between the 90% and the exceptions to the cap, I think were most important.
Yeah, the players are doing fine. The owners are spending too much money. I'm an owners guy.
Spending too much money?
Yeah, the owners are spending too much on player salaries.
We could talk about whether that was
No, no,
53% or
Yeah,
whether
no,
it was 59%.
Actually-
you guys said it was going to be 53. It turned
Yeah,
out to be 49.
Yeah, we must have lied. I don't know.
Did lie.
No, we didn't
That's
lie.
right.
We
You guys-
didn't
you
lie.
guys lied a little bit.
So, no, we didn't. We just sort of it
Said it was
depends how
a
you can-
bookkeeping
It depends what you could exclude. That's all.
The
Legally.
loopholes.
Well, the loopholes favored the players. You know, the players were very well represented,
Well, thank you.
and by economists. I accused one of them who's here today of being an economic proctologist because they wanted to know all of our facts. And they went, and we said, and this is the interesting part, we said, take them, you got everything. Here are the books. It just, at some point, there was no reason to be fighting over what the facts were. Of course, the players always accused us of hiding money even when we gave them all of the facts, but that was just standard bargaining rhetoric. That was post-Charlie, when we would say, here it is. We'd bring in boxes and this, and then Billy Hunter would get up and say, well, we can't trust them. So there was fake news, actually, before there was fake news. But now it's happening in all sports. It's good. There's transparency. Here are the numbers. You can't lie about the numbers. And the best question is, how do we, raise the numbers by working together to increase our popularity and our revenues, and then every so often we'll fight about how we divide it up.
Well, I think that was one of the good things about that time is that both sides recognized that there were outside forces that could potentially negatively impact our business. So the question was, would you work together on those things and fight over everything else?
Yeah, no, it's it's interesting for a mostly young audience. I mean, think about it. If you lived in New York in 1981 and you wanted to watch Magic Johnson and the Lakers play Dr. J and the 76ers, you waited until 11:30 so you could watch it on tape delayed. I mean, you say it fast, you don't think about it, but there was no streaming, no internet, by the way, no nothing, and that was pretty bad. But that was probably what we deserved in terms of the viewers that we would get if we had put it on in prime time. And this ESPN, TNT, the outlets you go to now to to look at sports, the playoffs at this point, they weren't factors. TNT didn't exist, and ESPN, in 1981, maybe they had 12. Len, what are you saying? 2 million? 2 years old, and it had 6 million subscribers. And so there was no cable to speak of, and there were 3 networks, maybe a 4th, and that was it. And so, we were not a favored show of any kind, and so it was really lousy. And so the result was we worked together with our players to try to get things done. And I remember in 1983, which was a big collective bargaining year for us, we finished the economic part, and then I said, okay, we got to do something about drugs. What do you think we should do? And, someone who I really do love, Bob Lanier, who was president of the union, said, well, if we catch a guy who's doing drugs, we should throw him out for life. I said, Bob, life is a long time. Let's, how about, and so the notion that you could ban a player for life, but consider his readmission after 2 years was not a player-generated idea. It was an owner-generated.
Well, if you remember, it wasn't quite an owner's.
I don't remember
We all sat
anything.
around a
I'm too
round
old.
table instead of a square table. See, we would,
Okay.
wasn't one side or the
No,
other.
but people,
Remember, we wanted to talk about how do we do this
but
together.
People would be willing to say, people who were skeptical accuse the owners of bowing to pressure from the players to let banned players in, and they didn't understand that actually the players felt as strongly about the drug issue as the owners did.
Well, the biggest challenge was to convince both sides that it was a health issue, and therefore we had to create a program as well as a policy.
Right, right.
That was what led to the...
Right. Okay. No, Charlie. You know, like always, Charlie. You're right. When you're not wrong, that we came up with a program that said we will have lots of education about the dangers of drugs. We will have testing. We will
Reasonable cause testing.
reasonable cause testing. That was before we went to, that's right. Now we have random testing, but reasonable cause testing. But if you get caught without coming forward, you're out.
Right.
But if you come forward, you're not out. You will be paid your salary and you'll come into treatment. It was interesting. What we were dealing with at the time was a different America. And the assumption was, of course these guys are using drugs. They're black. They're making too much money. The average salary was $250,000. Crazy money. And if they're wearing afros or whatever the current, they must be bad. And it was kind of interesting to watch and see that drugs became a huge issue across society. So all of a sudden, hospitals, police forces, schools were dealing with this drug issue, and suddenly America, overreacted in certain ways, and these terrible penalties for drug use and drug selling, because they sort of caught up with us in a certain way, and and we sort of see the racism that was prevalent then, resurfacing here from time to time. I mean, I sat in the editorial offices of the Boston Globe where one of the editors of one of the sections said, "You don't understand, Stern," and this is before I was commissioner, actually, "your sport will never succeed because a white America is never going to accept a black sport, and you're becoming a black sport." So that was sort of when we weren't fighting each other, Charlie and I, we were fighting outside forces together in the milieu, which was not very hospitable for a sport that was perceived as 100% black. And it's kind of interesting. We used to sit around joking. The NFL was moving to a large minority predominance, but because they wore helmets, long pants, and long sleeves, and they weren't running around in their underwear like our guys were, it was differently perceived. And we used to say, it's funny, one year, many years later, they put USA Today had a rogue of horrors, or a row of horrors. They listed all the players in the NFL who had been arrested in the preceding year. And we always felt that if that had been the NBA, we would have been out of business, because we were perceived as the black sport. And so the drug issue was something that was really important to us collectively. We needed to dispel it. It wasn't as true as the newspaper said it was, but it was there. And when I became commissioner in '84, it was very well received by our fans and would-be fans that we had worked on something together to deal with a problem.
Well, I see recently, however, you have changed your position on marijuana.
Yeah. Well,
Can't get off the weed.
no, I must say that I've not only done that, I changed my position on sports betting too.
Well,
we
we'll
can
get
talk
to
about
that
that
later.
later. Yeah, I was watching. I watch CNN a lot, and Sanjay Gupta did a series which basically said this hostility to medical marijuana was wrongly placed. And he won me over to read about parents living in New Jersey with kids who were epileptics who had to move to Colorado so they could get marijuana for their daughter was nonsensical to me. So I came out and said, I think that medical marijuana should certainly be available. And it was sort of, he did me no favor. John Sally said, oh, that's great. I'm going over to the NBA to light up with Adam Silver. Now, that is not exactly what I said, but that was, and so I was accorded a certain status that isn't all true. But we were concerned about recreational drugs, and they were being abused, and we were also concerned about marijuana, the ultimate recreational drug. And our players were too, because they sort of asked us to focus on a little bit, because we had a number of players who overdid it in their use of marijuana. And so it was always a juggling act.
Speaking of marketing and marketing the league,
Yeah.
let's go back to the '92 Dream Team. And how did that fit in the overall marketing strategy of the NBA to become worldwide?
Everyone always assumes we had a strategy. And I would say that our strategy was get through the day and be opportunistic when you had an opportunity. And the Olympics were something that we didn't plan for, wasn't high on our agenda. And in 1987, Boris Stankovic, the then head of FIBA, came in and said to Russ Granick and me, we think you guys should be in the Olympics. And we said, okay. But of course, we knew that there were two federations that would work hard to make sure that would never happen. The Russian Federation and the US Federation. And in fact, both federations voted against it in 1987. Could have been 88. But in fact, and we said, that's okay, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But it worked. So in 88 or 87, they said, okay, we're going to include pros in the '92 Olympics. Now remember, the definition of pro was not whether you earned money, it was where you lived. Because in the US, if you took money at the NBA, you were a pro, but if in Italy you took the same amount of money, you were an amateur. And that was true throughout the rest of FIBA. And FIBA said to us, it doesn't make any sense for us, FIBA, to be in charge of the best basketball players in the world, except the 350 best. And that's when we said, okay, we'll do it. And then suddenly, we said, okay, now let's put a team together. We got ourselves into this, let's go. So it wasn't some grand design, it was really about the opportunity. And obviously, the team was incredible, and the NBA staff, mostly without me, worked incredibly hard to put together this team, promote this team, sign licensing deals for this team, sign sponsorships for this team. And really what it did, I mean, in Barcelona, it was like being with the Beatles. It was incredible. When Charles walking down the Ramblas, followed by crowds and crowds of crowds, it was something to behold. They had their own hotel, and crowds gathered around it, etc. And the most important impact, I'd say, of the Dream Team, so-called, was that we had games distributed in maybe 80 countries before 1992, and then we suddenly began a climb up to the current 213 countries. And if there was an event that focused on global expansion, it was the Dream Team in Barcelona. You know, where we could say, you know, you saw Charles give, well, this was at the pre-tournament of the Americas, where Charles, no, I guess it must have been Dream. Charles decided to give an Angolan an elbow to the head. You know, Charles, the philosopher king who sits at TNT talking about all of the important issues. And he said, well, I just wanted to show the brother what it was like in the hood. Oh, thank you, Charles. We really, you know, I mean, people remember it fondly, but I don't actually, because the media said that this is stupid. The U.S. will always have the best basketball players in the world. It'll always be the greatest. And I said something like, no, that the only way that FIBA is going to catch up with us is if we play against them. And they said, that's ridiculous, you know. And by the way, just to dispel while we're sitting here, we didn't go to 92 because the 88 team lost. It had nothing to do with us going back to reclaim the gold. We did it in response to an honorable request by FIBA, which was the head of global basketball, and we wanted to be good basketball neighbors. If in fact it had been 96 or 2, it would have been okay too. But once we got there, the media said, it's ridiculous, we'll always be the best. And I said, no, they're going to catch up, and they ridiculed me. And then Charles gave the Angolan an elbow to the head, and Michael stepped up to the podium to receive his gold medal by draping the American flag over his Reebok logo. Okay, just to give you an idea of what it was like. And then in 2002, we sent a pretty good team to the World Championships, coached by George Karl, and we finished 6th. You know, so it does matter when you give other nations an opportunity to play against the best.
Yeah, I want to take you back to a personal question.
Okay.
In 1993 and 94, we were invited to South Africa to meet Nelson Mandela. And I want to know personally, because it affected me, I wondered how it affected you, because if you recall, we were negotiating a new deal about the same time.
Yeah. In 1993, Richard Lapchick, who was then the head of the Center for the Study of Sport and Society at Northeastern, I think.
Yes.
Somehow, through him, I don't know how, we got an invitation by from the NOCSA, the National Olympic Committee of South Africa. And we said, okay, let's take a group there. And it was Union and the NBA, Charlie, Alex English.
Yeah. Bob didn't.
No, Mike Bantam, Dikembe. We had some coaches too.
Alonzo Mourning.
That was the next year. We went back to that. So, and we were concerned because all of these were at times when many people in this room were not born. There were killings going on in the, I guess, in the hostels.
That was the ending of apartheid.
It was the end. Right, but it was the Zulu Nation and the ANC were not getting along so well, and so we had a lot of players cancel. And I think Charlie and I decided that if we're going to send people, we better go ourselves. So we went, but it wasn't, you know, and at the end, it actually turned out that, how do I say this? That apartheid was not legally over yet in South Africa. And we were wrestling with that. Should we go? Should we not go? But then they told us, whether it was Richard Lapchick or someone from the organizing committee, said to us, we said, should we go? And they said, well, we'll have Nelson Mandela stop by at dinner. And so we said, that's good enough for us. We're gonna, we'll do it. And so we went. Now, this is a longer story, but I almost savor it. So our then head of security, Horace Bama, calls my room as dinner was approaching and says, David, Mr. Mandela, and Horace was by that time was palling around with ANC security like they were long-lost brothers. He says, the old man, that's how they referred to President Mandela. Charlie, I think we're being told that there's a better way to do this. The old man wanted to come up and see me. So I called up Charlie and said, Charlie, you better put your pants on because Nelson Mandela is going to be in my room momentarily. So Charlie put his pants on, and I, of course, put mine on, and knock on the door, and there, standing in the doorway, is Nelson Mandela. It was incredible. And Charlie and I and my wife Diane sat with Nelson Mandela half an hour, 45 minutes, and it was just incredible. And he was talking about a lot of things. Charlie and I haven't discussed this at all, I don't think. We should write down what we can still remember. Yeah. And Mandela, we talked, and he said, thank you for coming. We're delighted to be here. He said, I'm glad you didn't bring books. I said, why is that? He said, because as part of our protest, we kept our kids out of school, and they can't read. It never even dawned on me, okay? And then he said that he really believed that sports could bring people together, which was, to me at least, cemented a view that I was hatching, which was learned from when Magic Johnson was HIV positive and what sports contributed to that. And he said, do you have any questions for me? And I said, yes. And by the way, the thing about sports, of course, was sort of verified. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen the movie Invictus, which was about how Nelson Mandela embraced an almost all-white rugby team as a symbol of South Africa, over the objection of certain ANC members, but he did it because he thought sports could bring people together. It's a very moving, movie. And I said, yes, I'd like to ask you one question. Why are you so peaceful? I don't understand. You've been in jail in Robben Island for 27 years, and you're sitting here talking calmly about everything that's happened to you. And there are two things that I take from that. One is, I had seen the Russian dissident earlier that summer, Sharansky, Natan Sharansky. And I said, Mr. Mandela, this is my big summer for dissidents, you and Natan Sharansky. He said, yes. He said, he had it worse than I did. I said, how's that possible? He was in the Gulag for like 9 years, and you were in Robben Island for 27. He said, yes, but he had no books. I could read. So, and then he said, the reason I'm so peaceful and calm is because if you had come here 3 years ago, I would have been in Robben Island. And if you had come here like a year and a half ago, I was out, and I was being consulted on every major decision. And if you come here next year, my inauguration of president is going to confirm me as president. He said, that's That's pretty good. Keeps me calm. Okay. What do you remember, Charlie?
Well, I remember most that
I don't know if you're getting. Charlie was always technologically challenged. Let me see if I can help you out here.
you can help me.
Okay. I think we need to refund here because it doesn't say on.
Hello?
Now talk. That's it.
Hello.
Okay.
Much better.
All right. You're talking to that, not that.
David. I don't need your advice.
Okay. So what?
So anyway,
What do you remember?
I remember most that he talked about agents of change. And he talked specifically about how you and perhaps I could be agents of change because once we recognize that you are the person to get that done, that all your personal agenda goes to the bottom of the barrel. And I thought that
Did he say that? You know, I absorbed it. I thought it was subliminal, but he inspired
he
me.
actually said that.
How do you like
And
that?
I thought that afterward, and certainly during that year of our negotiations, I sort of felt that the offer of a no strike, no lockout at that time, given our history with Nelson Mandela, I thought maybe that had influenced your decision.
No, in fact, what influenced my decision, where that impacted me the most was the way the NBA became devoted to social responsibility, which ultimately came to NBA Cares, where every one of our teams had a community relations department, which we changed the name to social responsibility. And I would say that Nelson Mandela, who he was and what he said, together with Magic Johnson announcing with HIV positive,
Let's go back to that.
made me determined that sports would be the agent of change that you recall him saying specifically.
Well, being more specific about Magic Johnson, we've always discussed that as being the hardest or the most difficult negotiation because you negotiated with the public.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of interesting. The Magic and the Mandela, Eminem, were really defining for me because with Magic, as a country, and again, I hate saying it this way, you guys don't remember, you weren't born. Magic, we as a country, were dealing with a young man in Indiana named Brian White, who was Ryan White. Ryan White. Ryan, and he was not allowed to be in school. He was a kid because he was a hemophiliac who had gotten a bad transfusion and he was HIV positive. And we said, you kid, no good, you can't play in the sandbox with the other kids. And that's the state of what the nation is about. It's really interesting. There's a play that's about to be revived on Broadway called The Boys in the Band. I mean, America was like nuts over HIV and AIDS. There was hysteria. And all of a sudden, the most beloved of athletes announces that he's HIV positive. And so we decided that, for better or for worse, he was ours. And so I went to be with him, and we were all supportive, union, NBA, etc. I had certain owners call me and say, you know, you should do some polling because, you know, you may be out ahead of the band here, to mix my metaphors. And I said, no, this is an opportunity for us to lead and to change. And Magic Johnson and the discussion of his HIV positive status really did change the debate in this country about AIDS. And that sort of was one of the pillars confirming to me that we really could be agents of change. But it wasn't easy. It was so not easy. It was like from Central Casting. People forget, Magic announced in November of '91. The Australian Olympic team announced in '92 that it wasn't going to play against us because of Magic Johnson was HIV positive. Karl Malone from Central Casting announced that he wasn't going to play against Magic because you can get HIV from perspiration. Holy Moses. I mean, we spent more hours together with the union, with ourselves, etc. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Because you couldn't test. It wasn't allowed to test. And so how do you ban a player who announces he's HIV positive if you're not going to test everyone and throw everyone out of the league? It was a nutty, and we hired the best doctors we knew who told us definitively, you cannot transmit HIV, the virus, through perspiration. But we were worried.
I got
Nice. Okay.
it. Moving forward, though, I recently read that the New York Knicks were selling the Liberty. Let's go back to the formation of the WNBA in '96. And what does the future look like for women's professional basketball?
Well, I don't want to. I'm not an agent of the NBA anymore, so I can't speak for the league. But it was exciting for us. Little known, we really were planning to come out of the box after the '92 Olympics, except the women's team won the bronze rather than the gold. So we deferred our launch until '96, post-Atlanta, when the women's team won the gold. And it was heady times. We came out like a flash. It was very good. But we're now 21 years later. It's still pretty good. The basketball is much better than it was when we launched. And when we launched, we told everybody it couldn't get better than it was. It was great, but it's even greater now. And the athletes are much more talented, I think. I think the NBA is strongly supporting it. TV revenues are up. We have to always work hard on attendance. And the Garden has a very difficult cost structure because of its unions, Charlie. It probably costs $250,000 to do a game at the Garden, and if you want to do it at the county center, it probably costs $2,500. And so it does have a big, I understand what the Knicks did. And actually, we came out of the box and made some mistakes. I thought that we should expand very rapidly because after we launched, there were still players who had played in a competing league, the ABL, who there were not enough roster spots for. So we pushed ahead and we expanded, and it was too much. I don't remember exactly how large we got, and so now it's cut back to its current size. But I think the NBA is behind it. I think that it separates basketball in a way from other sports. We're now working on our third women's soccer league. There's been a women's football league. There's been a women's fastball league and probably some slow pitch leagues. There's been a women's hockey league, which is now sort of back, Canadian and U.S. But the basketball is the only place where you can take a Division I or maybe even a Division II woman and have them play at the next level after their NCAA tournament is over. So I think it's here. I would hate to see it not be here.
What about gambling? If we go back, there was a time when we were protecting our game and protecting the integrity of the game. And now we're talking about a 1% integrity fee.
You're asking hard questions.
So is it for sale
Charlie.
or not?
No. I think the integrity fee is an unfortunate word. I think the fee should be a licensing fee. As the commissioner has said, the NBA spends billions of dollars to create the product, and casinos are going to make a lot of money on it. And so we should license them to use our intellectual property in connection with the betting on sports, et cetera. I think a number of things have happened. Number one, there are now 3 different organizations that govern on a global basis integrity based upon movement and point spreads, et cetera. Number 2, the numbers show that Las Vegas, which is the one place that has gambling, may have $4 billion bet, and there are probably $200 billion, or pick a number, bet illegally, with the profits going to unsavory elements. I don't want to insult the state of New Jersey, the state of the Sopranos, but, no, but, and so why not? In the hunger for sports, in the hunger for dollars, it became sort of inevitable to us that it was going to get legalized. And the betting is, if there was such a thing, I don't bet myself, but the betting is that the Supreme Court will do something that enables New Jersey to offer sports betting. And I think it's okay. The time has come. And it's going to help the sports leagues. And when it helps the sports leagues, it helps their players, because if revenue increases, all of the ships go up.
Yeah, they're looking at a 25% potential increase in revenue.
Really? That's amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know how that gets delivered, but I do know this. I would be worried if I were a video gaming company, because I think that fans are going to watch sports more and for longer periods of time because of something that's called a proposition bet.
That's part of the reason the leagues are interested in seeing
Yes.
gambling.
No. Well, the leagues are interested in seeing gambling because its time has probably come. And we've marched back a lot. I mean, I have a long history in this, so I was writing anti-gambling statements for Commissioner Walter Kennedy when I was a young lawyer to say, we testified, talk about history, that if they legalize gambling in Atlantic City, talk about New Jersey, it would be where the buildings would be better, but other than that, there would be no benefit other than increased prostitution, alcoholism, loan sharking, absenteeism, and crime. And guess what? Successive mayors were taken away in handcuffs. Everything else happened, and I guess in greed there was an overexpansion, and Atlantic City is bankrupt and no better off than it was before there was gambling.
Okay, so we talk about gambling on the professional side, and we understand the calculation, we understand how it increases revenue for both players and owners. What about college sports? And we look at the recent report of the commission, and we're talking about a scandal in basketball, probably in football as well. What do you think of that commission, and what do you think the results are? Do they work? Disingenuous?
Well, I have to tread carefully here. I haven't seen I'm going to turn it around a little bit. I'm guessing that even anonymized, the commission did not analyze the 20 or so players that were so-called one and done. Because one is an exaggeration. It might be a half and done, okay? Because there are certain players that come into school. I don't know this, but the commission didn't help me out on learning this. And they stay to go to school the first semester, go to classes, and the second semester they don't, and they play in the tournament, and then they leave. So we've got I think that's like the case, And I think this may not be fair entirely, so I'm waiting to be educated. And then, if the school is afraid that they'll lose a scholarship because the player dropped out, they make sure the player gets some online courses in order to complete the 1 year so they don't lose the scholarship. Now, I may be hallucinating on all of this, but the better question for me is, where are the college presidents? And why are they admitting such players into their institutions and lowering their standards to do it? I've changed the topic a little bit on you.
It's called revenue.
Well, I don't think it's revenue. I think it's called the alums will get ticked off, or you better run a good team. In other words, I just saw that Duke got numbers 1, 2, 3, and 12 on the list of best, whatever. And they're going to be there for 1 year. Maybe Mike Krzyzewski has a way to get them to go to class the second semester. And maybe Calipari does or doesn't, I don't know. But it's corrupt in its own way, in a different way. You're holding yourself as this institution of higher education, and you don't want to be a professional. Oh my God, you can't be professional. So you let these kids in, you recruit them, they lead your team to some victories or another, and then they walk away, or you discard them, or consider them to be both sides of the same coin. I think the colleges got off too easily with respect to the report. It was very easy. Okay, what we should do is have the NBA and the Players Association change the rules. And by the way, the rule is not one and done. That's a construct that the coaches and the presidents put on it. The rule is we would like to take players when they're 19. That's our right to decide what the working conditions should be. Now, I was poring over the reports of the report to see whether they had one idea that I thought was a good one. If you're so pro-player, let a player play in the G League or do something professionally. But if he isn't drafted because he's not good enough, let him go to college and let him play in college. But you know what? Oh my God, would say the presidents, he'll be a professional. Well, that's baloney. He's a kid. He's a student. He's not good enough to play at the high. They say, well, he can put his name in the draft, and but if he doesn't get drafted, then he can pull his name out, and he won't lose his quote amateur status. We need new definitions of words amateur and professional, because it's all done for the benefit of the colleges and not for the kids. The fact of the matter is, I would let a kid play in the G League, and if he's not good enough and he's not drafted from the G League in that 1 year, let him go to college. That would be good. And under present conditions, he'll probably earn as much in college as he would in the G League.
Remember, there wasn't 18.
What?
There was a rule at one point that 18 was
right, but now
satisfactory.
it's 19.
Now it's 19. Well, maybe it should be 18.
Maybe. By the way, that may be. I actually grew up in an era when freshmen didn't play. And so we have the spectacle of Connie Rice getting up and saying, well, if the NBA isn't going to change its rule, then we might come back and recommend that we have freshman ineligibility. That's not terrible. You mean the freshmen would come and they could work out a little bit and they'd go to classes and make a big stride for their college education? Oh no, we don't want to do that. Why would we do that? It's bizarre. And we all get fed all of this stuff, and it makes no sense at all to me. Because, a freshman, I think it's a good thing, freshman ineligibility, in terms of college athletes, but maybe there are sports where it isn't such a good idea, and people are so closely identified with their athletic pursuits that you want them to do that. Then what you should do is allow them to come to the G League when they're 18, and if they don't get drafted, let them go play in college. But no, because they would be professionals, and that would sully their amateur status. And I'm not even touching the issue of whether they're amateurs or not, whether they should be paid,
etc. There was a joke going around in the old days when President Trump owned the New Jersey Generals of the USFL. No one knew him before he was a sports figure. Talk about the power of sports. And he had a player by the name of Herschel Walker. And the joke was that Georgia, for whom Herschel Walker played in college, was upset because Herschel didn't give him a chance to match. That's a joke, okay? Because, and guys that I've worked with, they talk about their cars, their off-campus apartments. I mean, it was like,
Well, it really comes back to the question of whether the sham continues or is the sham changed.
well, it would be nice if it changed. I can imagine such a harsh recommendation. If a coach is guilty, he should not be allowed to coach anymore. Oh, really? Okay, got it. I would let him back after 2 years.
After 2 years.
I'm a softie. I'm a softie. But the stakes are so high that unless you do something dramatic, and maybe if you do something dramatic, it doesn't matter.
But don't you see something there that a Calipari, for example, or even a Coach K can make $10, $11 million a year, and that it's a professional business for those who are in it, but it's an amateur business for those who
By the
play.
way, the answer to that is we should have a salary cap for coaches. Okay? But no, we got a better idea. Let's not cap the coaches. Let's tell the NBA and the union they should change their rules. Oh, okay, Secretary Rice. So what's up with that? And so I agree. And a coach can leave, having recruited a player, the coach can leave. Is the player allowed to
No.
It's totally unbalanced, and so we've come out with it unbalanced. It was a good commission, and they mean well, but their major recommendation is what the NBA should do. And we have good old rubber stamp Emmert. We'll vote immediately to implement the most important, which is the NBA and the Players Association to change their rules. Now, it may be my tea leaves say that the NBA and the Players Association are likely to want to do that. But I would like to see some, the other side of it, where the colleges step up and do something as well. And for me, the issue is whether a player earned money or not. Non-athletes can work in the summertime as paralegals or whatever they want to do, or accounting interns, and get paid. But a player in college can't get paid to play basketball. Not $1. It's embarrassing. It really is. Think about what's emerging. So you can't play, and if you, God forbid, took $25,000 to play in the G League and then want to come to us, well, we're not going to give you a scholarship. But if I'm a president and I'm saying, please, don't come to us. Go to the G League. Okay, he goes to the G League, he doesn't get drafted, let him go to college and play basketball. That's the Stern proposal.
Well, we are moving close to our time here. Perhaps do we have time for a question or two from the audience?
Come on, ask us a question. Give us your best shot. Any questions? If I could walk, I would run down and hold up the mic. Sir.
So David, what do you think about players just getting paid outright? College players getting
What do I think about college players getting paid outright? I in an interesting kind of a way, I think that question becomes inevitable. I'm not going to take a position on it, but there's just so much money in the college game that the people who produce it there are going to be questions about how you split the spoils, and each new negotiation for football or basketball. And there will be others now. There will be esports teams at colleges. There are going to be rugby teams, lacrosse teams, because in the search for content, there are going to be so many more games on. And if they're not on the big networks, they're going to be on everything from YouTube Network to Hulu to Sling to DirecTV Now to Fubo. It's going to be unbelievable. And people are going to say, with all this money, why don't we do something? And historically, I haven't been in favor of payment. I've been in favor of allowing these youngsters to live decent lives. And you start from a rule which says oh, we're not even give you enough money so your parents can come and watch you play in a game. That's disgusting. So, and so now the backlash is, okay, then pay them. But they should get these stipends that allow them to not sit there with their noses up against the glass watching other people enjoy the college experience where athletes who are from poorer homes are not able to. You know, maybe I think the demand's going to be overwhelming, and the commission is busy talking about professional versus amateur. I think we need a redefinition going on here, because when Charlie just said not $1, that dollar makes you a professional. It's ridiculous.
Thank you very much, David, for coming.
Thank you.
We enjoyed it.